Live from the Washington, D.C. area, it's the Inside Scoop. All the news that our viewers want to know. Now, here's the host.
Welcome to Inside Scoop. I'm your host this week, Mary Barthelson. Our topic tonight is housing and homelessness in Fairfax County. We are joined by our guest, Mary Paden. In addition to chairing the Fairfax NAACP's Fair and Affordable Housing Committee, Mary is a member of the South County Task Force. She has earned several awards for her work on housing-focused county advisory committees, including a Hero Award from the Greater Washington Coalition for Smarter Growth. Mary, thank you for joining us. And when I first became involved in this area of advocacy myself, you were one of the first people I spoke to. I was told that you know anything and everything about housing issues in Fairfax County. And the longer I've known you, the more true I think that statement is. When and why did you first decide to get involved in housing advocacy?
Well, thank you for that, Mary. I didn't originally start in housing. I started in environment, and before that I was in journalism. And I grew up in Detroit, where we had urban renewal and civil rights movement, and was very influenced by that. And I don't know, about 8 or 10 years ago, while I was living in Virginia in the Route 1 corridor, I was doing a story for a local, very local paper, which has sadly gone away. And I was interviewing homeless people, and I found them just fascinating. And I ended up writing a 4-part series on them. And I researched it really well, and I learned a lot, and I learned that something should change because it wasn't right for that many people to be walking around without any homes. So I kind of got into it from there. I was in the South County Task Force, which is a 50-year-old group of people along the Route 1 corridor that have served homeless people. Started out back in the mid-'70s. They noticed people freezing and starving in the woods and started offering the churches during the wintertime for where people could sleep, and that's grown into a countywide hypothermia problem system where a lot of churches and a lot of places, with the support of the faith communities, give people a safe, warm place and a warm meal on winter nights. Now we're looking at hyperthermia. Because we have global warming, it's getting, it's just the health issues are getting also bad in the summer.
So you're a trained journalist. I'm sure that storytelling has come in handy through your advocacy. I know that the NAACP is always at the forefront championing these issues. When did you join the Fairfax NAACP?
I joined quite a while ago, maybe 8 or 10 years ago, but I became active, I guess, the past 5 years. I've been running this committee.
The Housing Committee.
The Housing Committee for the Fairfax NAACP.
And so the Fairfax NAACP is a racial advocacy group, but they often lead the charge to reduce housing insecurity and homelessness for everyone. So why is this a topic that the NAACP is so interested in?
Well, there's two entries to it. One is NAACP has always been a champion of fair housing, way back from the 20s and 30s and 40s. NAACP was always going to the Supreme Court with issues about fair housing. Even around in my neighborhood, they took a case to the Supreme Court. And then the affordable housing comes in because so many people of color are poor, because they have not had a chance to build the intergenerational wealth, because they were denied housing by racial covenants, by redlining, by a number of different things. So they end up more in the lower income areas, and it's very, very hard to find lower income housing, especially in Fairfax County.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we are a very high income area, and I was reading a statistic the other day that Fairfax County has 10% Black residents, but they make up 45% of the homeless population. So I guess it makes sense why the NAACP would want to champion these issues. For those who are not familiar, can you explain what the difference is between fair housing and affordable housing?
Well, fair housing is housing practices that discriminate against people because of their race, their age, their sexual preferences, their ethnicity. In Virginia, we have about 20 protected classes, they're called. They're things that you can't discriminate against people for. Disability, those kind of things. And that is independent of income. You can discriminate against people who are rich or poor, but if they're disabled, you discriminate against them for that reason, then you're in trouble. The affordable housing is mainly looking for more housing for people who are kind of at 60% or below of the area median income. So these are the people who often work, or often the people who clean the schools, who work in the bus driving. There's a lot of jobs in Fairfax County that put you in the 60% AMI bracket, but there's not a lot of housing available on the market for those people.
I'm curious, I know that Virginia, we have a history as the capital of the Confederacy, and I would like to think that we've moved forward since then, but I'm curious if this statistic we have in racial disparity among the homeless is something that is replicated across the country, or if it's specific to Virginia, or are we not sure what those statistics look like?
I think it's pretty similar. I think it's worse in places where you have more black people, like in DC. I think it's 80% of homeless are African American. In Fairfax County, I came across a really interesting graphic recently that it shows the distribution of white and black people in Fairfax County up to around 1950. There were quite a lot more black people here. And around the 1950s is when you started having the big rush to the suburbs, and you had all these restrictive covenants, and black people couldn't buy houses, they couldn't even rent houses in subdivisions. And all this big flux of white people came in, and they just kind of took over the graph. It was just big population boom, and most of it white. And then lately we're getting more immigration, more Hispanic, more Asian, but the the number of blacks has not rebounded to the level it was before the 50s. Before the 50s, it was like 25% black.
I know that owning a home is very important for accumulating generational wealth, and you mentioned some of the policies which prevented Black Americans from being able to purchase and own a home. Can you talk a little bit about those policies, I think, such as redlining? They're not in practice anymore, but I know that they were pretty extensive at one point.
Yeah. Redlining wasn't so much the problem in Fairfax, it was more the covenants, I think. And there were quite a few black landowners before the 50s. There were black farmers and black villages and black communities that aren't there anymore. Gum Springs in Mount Vernon is one of the few the oldest and one of the few left historically black communities. But most of them were taken over for highways and urban projects, and the black landowners disappeared quite a bit. In the 50s, there were restrictions, and black people couldn't buy property here. When it was cheap, when the suburbs were cheap, they were off limits to black people, even the ones who lived here already. So now it's expensive to buy anywhere. Now in my little neighborhood, which was built in the 50s, it's like $600,000, $700,000 to get a home, and it's not really accessible to
it's
lower income people or starter. It's still considered starter homes, but you have to have good jobs to start there.
It's definitely gotten very expensive, and so a lot of those policies, which were openly racist, have gone away, and yet we still have disparities in homeownership and homelessness. What are the fair housing issues that the Fairfax NAACP is championing in 2023?
Well, Fairfax recently joined with all the different jurisdictions in the COG area, the Council of Governments of Metropolitan Washington, and we came up with 7 kind of goals for fair housing that the whole region could agree on. And they're pretty good goals. They haven't really honed them down to become specific actions that we're going to take. And we're urging the Board of Supervisors to set up an administrative structure and a method of really getting them down to certain actions that can produce progress in those areas. One of them is home ownership for minorities. One of them is really focusing on people with disabilities who probably are at the bottom of the scale in terms of getting housing. They really have a hard time. There's just the idea of building more affordable housing, because it has to be subsidized in some way, or there's not such a thing as market rate affordable housing. Any housing that's built without some kind of subsidy is not going to be affordable to people under 60% AMI. Anyway, the goals are there. What we'd like to see is a little more continuation of testing. Fairfax County has done some testing. The problem with finding out if you're being discriminated against is you can't know when it's happening. You can't know if you're being discriminated because you're black or if everybody's being treated that way. So you have to hire a company that does this testing, and they have to send out paired couples, one black couple, one white couple. Otherwise, they have the same background. They go into a rental agency or a mortgage company, and they say they want to buy a house or rent a unit, and then they're maybe treated differently. And the testing they did last year found out that many were treated differently. And generally, the white couple was treated better than the black couple. So we need to pursue those initial investigations and really make it known that we won't tolerate racial discrimination in housing in Fairfax County.
Yeah, absolutely. That's definitely a great initiative. Are we expecting further progress on those efforts in the coming year that maybe our audience can look out for, that they should speak to their elected officials about? Or is it still in work? I think
they definitely should speak to their elected officials, demanding more of this kind of testing. And more maybe prosecution of people. If it's found that certain companies are discriminating, then it should go after them.
Absolutely. I definitely believe that, in such a well-off community as Fairfax County, and such a diverse community as well, we want to make sure that no one's treated unfairly. And I'd like to talk to you more about affordable housing. We're about to go to commercial break, but we'll be back with more from our guest after the break.
So, I just moved in with this family, and it's embarrassing. The little one, he likes to go outside and crawl around in the giant litter box. I don't know what he's doing. I mean, I was born and I knew how to use the litter box. Look at that. That's disgusting. Oh, poop already. You're making me nervous. Oh, okay, I can't look at this anymore. I really hope he grows out of this, for his sake.
So how was work?
It was 1,300 hours. My math class from 302 was in the trenches. Davy Roth had it the worst. Fractions were coming at him left and right. He just didn't get the damn things. 2 days ago, I tried to teach him what 1/4 of 1/2 was using different sizes of blocks. Yesterday, I tried again by dividing up pizza. Both missions failed.
Oh, no.
But today, I was ready. I created a combat math game where the only way to beat the enemy is to out-fraction them. Davy conquered every last denominator. My game was so successful, the principal is deploying it to math squadrons all over the school.
Anywho, how was your day?
Oh, today my boss treated the office to salad wraps.
Salad wraps.
No.
150 over 90.
180 over 111.
160 over 110. I had a stroke.
This is what high blood pressure looks like. You might not feel its symptoms, but the results from a stroke are far from invisible or silent. If you've come off your treatment plan, get back on it, or talk with your doctor to create an exercise, diet, and medication plan that works for you. Go to loweryourhbp.org.
If I would have followed a treatment plan, I would not be in this situation.
We're back to the Inside Scoop. Here again, your host.
Welcome back to Inside Scoop. I'm your host this week, Mary Barthelson. Our guest tonight is Mary Paden of the Fairfax NAACP and South County Task Force. Mary, I wanted to talk to you a little bit more about affordable housing. What is currently being done to address the housing needs?
Well, the county has really stepped up its building of new affordable housing in the last several years. It really needs to do that because there's a huge deficit. The county reported several years ago that there was a deficit of 30,000 affordable units, mainly rental units they're talking about. And that there would be an increase by 2034, we'd need another 15,000. So we need 45,000 units by 2034. So to fix that, to address that, the county announced a plan to build 10,000 units by 2034. So we're on the timeline for that. It's not enough, they know it, but it's what they think they can do. And they have been moving forward, but it's a slow process. It takes a long time to build affordable housing. It takes a long time, especially to build the kind of housing where you get the tax credits and you work with an affordable housing developer and you piece together all this very, very complicated financing to put in new units. And we've had a number of those be very successful recently and open, and that's very good. The kind of affordable housing that's the county has to take care of is it owns a lot of affordable housing already. Some of it was old HUD housing, or it was bought by the county in years past, and it's usually in older garden apartment style buildings. And the county's housing authority owns and runs that kind of housing. And then another kind of housing is permanent supportive housing, and that's for people who are really, really poor and usually maybe disabled or really elderly, or they're not going to pull themselves up by anybody's bootstraps. They just need to live and die in dignity, and that's what the permanent supportive housing does. It's got caseworker support. It's a tiny efficiency, but it's better than sleeping in a bunk bed. It's better than sleeping on the street. And we need about 300 of those kind of units. And we've got about 150 in the pipeline, but we need those fast because that's the only way to get people off the street is to have these little units that they can live in.
So we know that we're going to need 45,000 units, and the plan is for 10,000. So we're still short 30,000 units, and I imagine that was before the plan for Amazon to come in. And I wonder if that projection has even gone up since the time they've done that study. And is that for people who are below the 60% income level?
Yeah. I asked if it had gone up, and I was told that probably not because the population has not gone up a lot in recent years in Fairfax, so it's probably about the same. Amazon has helped a lot in some areas, but when a new housing development goes up, it's maybe 200 units, or like 400 is huge, a huge unit. So it's in smaller increments, and it's a lot of work to build each unit. So it goes slowly. Meanwhile, people get pushed out of the county. They get evicted. They can't keep up with the rent increases. We've had a lot of rent increases, and the market rate housing is not as affordable as it used to be. We have about 9,000 units of market rate affordable housing, and that means generally older garden apartment style housing. You see a lot of it on Route 1, a lot in Culmore area, a lot of it out in kind of Reston, Herndon area. And those are just old buildings that they charge less rent because they don't have all the amenities and they're kind of worn down. But those buildings are all getting endangered by development. Like Embark on Route 1, they want to make very dense housing near these transit stops of the bus rapid transit. And these eventually these garden apartments are going to be in the way, and they're going to be threatened by that. So the county does have sort of a program to try to preserve them, or at least to preserve the number of housing units, but I don't think it's really strong enough to work when the developers are talking about tearing down a apartment building with 700 units. Those units are not going to get replaced at their current rate of rent.
It always seems like there's development going on, but maybe it's skewing more towards the higher income apartments because that makes more money. And you did make a comment about Amazon helping, so I wanted to ask you about that, because I know that a lot of people were concerned about Amazon coming in. I know that there's a lot of high income engineering firms in the area. I work for one myself, and we do make high incomes. And when you have a high income area, and make things less affordable for people who are not in those industries. Can you explain what you meant about Amazon helping out?
Well, they have given money towards affordable housing, and it's mainly been in Arlington, some in Alexandria, but a little bit of it's trickled over to Fairfax County. So they have given a few grants to our affordable housing developers to build affordable housing.
I'll take it.
I don't know how that balances out with the pressure they're putting on the market rate housing to raise their rents
to offset it. Yeah. I'm not sure either, but that'd be interesting to look at. And how is affordable housing distributed across the county? Is it something that's available throughout the county, or is it clustered in some areas and not others?
It needs to be available throughout the country on fair housing grounds. We have pockets, we call the pockets of poverty, that are like run through Route 1, up through Colmore and over into Herndon. And they're mainly Hispanic, they're mainly, racially segregated. In Route 1, there's also some black. Gum Springs is not necessarily a poor community, but they're poor. Some people live there are poor. But there's definitely a big segregated issue of segregation.
Depending on where you're located in the county?
Depending on where you're located, yeah. County does build affordable housing buildings throughout the county. As far as the market rate affordable housing, it is generally more in the older areas, because that's why it's affordable, because it's old.
Older. That
so
makes sense.
Route 1 has I think it's 12% of the supported affordable housing that was purposely intended to be affordable, and it has a lot more. 45%, I think, is the number of the market rate affordable housing. So it has a lot of old garden apartments that are kind of cheap rent. Now they're kind of run down too. I mean, they're not necessarily the best housing, but it's in those, and that's the area that's mainly targeted for redevelopment. So, I mean, this has happened
pushed
before,
out
right?
if you don't plan for it,
Many times, many places, but I think it's really time to intentionally not have it happen here. I think it's time to really do something different with development and not run everybody out of town.
That makes sense to me. We have people here from all walks of life. Why not plan a community around them for everyone, and not just those of us who are lucky enough to be high income? And so that reminds me that you guys also have been working on a lot of homelessness initiatives. It's pretty hot this summer. I was reading that this summer, July, was the hottest month on record ever, according to NASA. It was hotter by 7.2 degrees on average. So I have to wonder how the homeless in our community are managing and getting by, and what their experience has been like.
Well, luckily I can tell you about that, because we just finished a survey. We talked to we had a group of volunteers spread out to 3 points in the county at drop-in centers. So we talked to 63 homeless people, did a survey, an interview with them, and collected some data, and we're just putting that together now. But they did report a lot of heat-related physical illnesses, heat exhaustion, rashes, sweating, a lot of trips to the emergency room, dehydration, you know, very, very uncomfortable and unhealthy for them. And many of them are over 65. Fairfax County is aging, and so is the homeless population, even though that's a really rough life out there. I met a woman who was 82 who was homeless over at Rising Hope. And it's hard.
Are there shelters that are open for them so that they can take shelter from the heat?
No, we don't have we don't have a program like hypothermia in the winter for summer, hyperthermia. Maybe that's what we'll have to get going.
Do they have access to water, at least?
Last summer, NAACP kind of challenged the county to come up with some kind of program for homeless people in the summer, and they came up with a small program that involves a little kit of stuff like a little battery fan and some electrolyte things and body wipes and water. They give like one big case of water to drop-in shelter, like to Rising Hope. They brought them one case of water. Wow. For 100 people. They have people every day coming there for lunch. So I don't think they were really serious about distributing the water. But they do open up most of the government buildings as cooling centers. So whenever they're open, people can go in there and sit and cool off. But no, there's no overnight places except the 3 individual homeless shelters. You can go there when the heat index is 105 degrees or higher.
Wow.
That's pretty hot.
That's too hot.
You can go to the homeless shelter and sleep on the floor because there's no extra bed for you. All the homeless shelters are full, and that's about 150 people have bunk beds or beds of some kind in the homeless shelter, and that's it. And you can go sleep on the floor, and some people do. They do that. But otherwise, you're out in your tent, you're in the woods, you're out in the rain, you're out in the storm.
If someone in our audience is feeling inspired by the things that you've shared today, what is the best way for them to get involved, and how can they get in touch with you?
Well, the three places we've been working with is in Route 1 area, Rising Hope Church, Methodist Church, and they do a lot of work with the homeless. There's in Fairfax, the Lamb Center, and in Reston, the Reston Wellness Center, and those are the 3 places I'd urge people to go if they want to help.
Thank you so much. Make sure to stick around after the break. We will be continuing our discussion about housing and homelessness with Kerrie Wilson of Cornerstones.
Nice going, Spencer! I can't believe we broke Old Man Hennessy's window.
Correction, dude. You broke. I just threw the ball.
This is really bad. What are we gonna do?
We?
Go to the door, ask for the ball back. Are you serious?
It's my ball, Myrtleback.
You're so dead. I'd run away.
Yeah, to Uruguay.
Kiss your life goodbye. Sorry.
Let's go.
Dad.
See ya, dude. See ya. Remember me and your well.
Nice life. Some friends you are.
Keep smiling, keep shining.
Hi. Tell him it was an accident, and we can fix the window. Come on. I'll come with you.
Loyalty. Pass it on.
You go first.
A message from the Foundation for a Better Life.
One day these rats were playing in the woods. Well, it's a matches and that's no good. Listen to smoke before you give it a try. Only you. Don't play with matches. Don't play with fire. Cause there's nothing very funny about nothing very nice on a homeless mind. So if a gorgeous force is what you desire, don't play with matches. Don't play with fire. Yeah.
Only you can prevent wildfires.
Fire.
Awkward. I'm the awkward silence. You try to avoid me, then there I am again.
But an awkward silence can be a great thing.
Like Kelly here is about to demonstrate.
You haven't really been yourself lately. Are you okay?
Find out how you can help a friend with their mental health
at seizetheawkward.org.
We're back to the Inside Scoop. Here again, your host.
Welcome back to Inside Scoop. I'm your host this week, Mary Barthelson. We are joined by Kerrie Wilson, CEO of Reston-based nonprofit Cornerstones and chair of Fairfax County's Affordable Housing Advisory Committee. Kerrie has over 35 years of experience in advocacy, policy development, and nonprofit leadership in the field of health and human services. She has won multiple awards recognizing her achievements, including the Commonwealth Institute's Virginia Legacy Award in 2016. Prior to joining Cornerstones in 2001, Kerrie's career began at the American Cancer Society, where she worked on issues related to cancer prevention and control in women, minorities, and the medically underserved, and eventually became the National Vice President for Government Relations. Kerrie, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Before we dive into current events on housing and homelessness, can you share with us how you arrived at Cornerstones and what your journey has been?
Sure, and you know, I think it starts with my arriving in Fairfax County in 1976. My dad was a submariner. We moved from Hawaii and settled out in Herndon when there was really nothing there, no housing, so everything that your last guest was talking about in terms of the growth of the county, it was really a pretty wide open space. I came from a family where in the military my dad was out to sea 6 months out of the year, and so I was really inspired by my mom and the other, at that time it was all Navy wives who built community. They looked around, they helped each other with daycare, they helped each other sort of get to know in new communities and take care of the kids, and when the money was running short or when things were tough, they created that. And so when I came back from school and was looking around after working at the national level on issues, I really saw the opportunity to dig down and really make a difference, I hope, and build that community that I saw around me. And that's what brought me to Cornerstones, because it was the same sort of thing that I had experienced my life.
That's wonderful. I know that you guys have a lot of programs. I have a few listed here: emergency shelter, hypothermia prevention, affordable housing, foreclosure prevention, food assistance, childcare, and English as a second language, and the list was even longer than that, but that was the couple that I grabbed off the website. So you guys are involved in quite a bit in the Reston and Herndon area. I'm curious what you see as the top issues facing our community right now.
Yeah, and I think that Cornerstones has been around. We began as Reston Interfaith over 50 years ago.
Wow.
The same time in a new community that, again, was old farmland, and Robert E. Simon bought Reston and said, let's build a community where we can provide housing and other supports. So to where we are today with all those many programs, we started with some basic things: shelter, childcare, and really looking at food. And I'd say over the years, as our region has grown and the cost of living, everything we've seen, just as we've grown, it's also made it harder for so many families who are struggling to get by on a wage that's not a living wage. For us, what it all comes down to, I think, the foundational issues and what you're talking about today. Housing is it. If you can sit around your own kitchen table, if you know that your family, your kids have a safe place to sleep and to get what they need, I think that's the start. And I'm just so grateful that with the support we have from so many organizations, people out there, that we've been able to, build on those programs. First, it's housing. It's providing childcare for parents while they're working, and addressing so many needs like getting a better job, finding living wage job, and really addressing things like food insecurity. So
yeah, those are absolutely all very essential. And I grew up in Fairfax City, and my dad would always tell me that there used to be cows in Fairfax City. And I didn't really think about it that much at the time because you know, you see them when you drive out a lot farther, but it really has grown quite a bit. And in Reston and Herndon together we have a population of a little bit over 80,000. And I read a statistic the other day that 1 in 10 people in Fairfax County are experiencing poverty. So that's quite a large number of people. I was curious, with Cornerstones being the large service provider in that corner of the county, about how many people do you guys touch base with every year through one of your services?
And I think that that context you provided of how many people now live in the area, because believe me, when I left Capitol Hill and DC back in 2000, everybody was like, you know, what zip code are you moving to? It seems so far out, but together we touch the lives of more than 16,000 people each year. People who come through our many programs, whether it's shelter. What's really shocking to most people who don't think that, you know, could there be homelessness in Reston? That's not something that's a surprise today, because sadly we're seeing it with people in the bus shelters. But when I first started, people were out of sight. People didn't think that we had issues of poverty or homelessness out here in the Reston-Herndon community. So every year we're seeing greater and greater need. But
so. Do we have statistics on approximately how many people are experiencing homelessness in Fairfax County?
It's a really complicated number, but once a year in January, a point-in-time count is done across the region. And that night, we count people who are experiencing homelessness, who are in shelters, who are living unhoused in the woods, in their cars, or those that are in transitional or other housing programs that sort of count as being homeless. And so that's a number that we use each year to sort of mark our progress. And we made great progress after we declared a 10-year plan to end homelessness back in 2008. But the number doesn't tell the whole story. You have families that are struggling to make ends meet, doubled up in housing. When we look at the school system, we have so many more children that we see, again, who are viewed by the school system as being literally homeless because they are sleeping on couches, they are staying with friends, they don't have a permanent housing location. So the number is worse than it seems, even though right now it's somewhere around 1,000 people in a point-in-time count each year.
Okay, so just to reiterate that, the point-in-time check is done in January, and it's a little bit over 1,000, but we know that the number is likely higher, and I believe that the hypothermia programs are still open during that time. So I would imagine that when those close and there's more people displaced, that number likely goes up throughout the year.
It's a number that sort of changes throughout the year, certainly for single individuals who are experiencing homelessness. We know who people are. We know people who come in during the cold weather or during the hot weather, but then they move back out either to housing or back to the woods or places that they're comfortable with. So that number stays the same. We have seen greater numbers. I think it feels like it in recent years. Mostly changes in who we're serving. People with greater challenges, people who are aging. In this county, as we all get older, we're certainly seeing that same thing in single homelessness. With families, we've actually seen an increase in recent years, and that's something we're working on now.
Yeah, it's definitely concerning to see any rise in homelessness, but I read that a national statistic that showed that 1.8 million seniors devote more than $1 out of every $2 of their income to rent. And in Northern Virginia, more than 20% of households which are headed by seniors have an income of less than $30,000 a year because they're on a fixed income.
Correct.
So I would imagine that if they're on a fixed income and housing costs continue to rise, that we'll continue to see an increase in homelessness among that demographic.
Absolutely, and if you think about everything you knew even before the pandemic, when people were struggling and the cost of living, you know, did put housing out of reach for many and for many retirees. Since the pandemic, we've only felt that escalate. I think it has been a greater challenge. Rents are rising in the double digits. That's been the report. Certainly, we had a moratorium on evictions during the pandemic, so even people, seniors that you're talking about, or others who had stable housing, now are facing that burden if they can't afford that increase in rent, or if their benefits haven't gone up. And I think one of the things that we're feeling very acutely is the ending of additional benefits for food stamps and child benefits for families. All of those things have sort of coupled to make a real challenge that our community is dealing with.
Yes, and I know that we're still feeling the inflation following the pandemic, and everyone has not recovered, but those programs are winding down. So what do you think the #1 issue that people in our community are facing right now? Is it the inflation? Is it job opportunities with an affordable salary? What is it?
I think that question of what people are facing is still, as it always has been, housing is probably a foundational challenge. We've talked to people out in the community, the program participants who work with us, and it is about housing. It is about jobs that will pay a living wage. And mostly it's worry about the safety and the future for their children.
Yeah, I know it's definitely been difficult for my generation trying to plan to enter the housing market. So a lot of us are delaying starting families and just trying to look and figure out where we can get our foot in the door. So it is definitely a challenge for us as well. And I'm curious to know a little bit more about pandemic response and recovery for Cornerstones. We're going to go to a break in a minute, but we can talk a little bit more about that after the break. I know that Cornerstones and others were experiencing some staffing shortages. You guys have several thousand volunteers that you rely on, many of them being in Reston and Herndon were older. And so I imagine a lot of them stepped back during the pandemic at the time when you needed them the most.
Absolutely. And I look forward to talking to you about that.
Yeah, thank you so much. Don't go anywhere. We will be right back after a short break for more discussion with Kerrie Wilson. She is CEO of Cornerstones and chair of AHAC.
It's a beautiful day out here. Sunny today with light breezes, giving way to clouds in the afternoon. We could see some light precipitation to moderate precipitation later on, followed by powerful storm-like conditions. 90 miles per hour winds are expected. Authorities are asking everyone, stay indoors. Come on, that's it. Let's go.
Grandpa, look what I got. Let me see.
Oh, Dad, wait till you see the bike we got for Jake.
Hearing loss happens gradually with age, making it easy to ignore. Yet most older Americans aren't getting their hearing tested. Untreated hearing loss can keep your loved ones from enjoying what they cherish most.
Dad, can you hear me?
Don't let that happen. Speak up about hearing loss. You'll be glad you did.
You can't buy a best friend. You can love them, pet them, care for them, whether they want you to or not. You can take a picture, you can jump, yell, you can fly to the moon, travel the world, or just stay in bed. You can't buy a best friend like that, but you can adopt one. 'Cause we're connected.
Cook foods to the right temperature using a food thermometer. 3,000 Americans will die from food poisoning this year. Keep your family safer. Check your steps at foodsafety.gov.
We're back to the Inside Scoop. Here again, your host.
Welcome back. I'm your host, Mary Barthelson. We are joined by Kerrie Wilson, CEO of Cornerstones, to talk more about housing and homelessness in Fairfax County. Before we went to break, we were talking a little bit about the effect of the pandemic on our community and how inflation has really increased the cost of living, but a lot of the pandemic programs have started to wind down. So now we're seeing that effect hit. Can you talk a little bit about what that impact has been the last couple of years?
I think for everybody. I mean, so many people are ready to sort of, close the door on the pandemic, say, look in the rearview mirror and say it's over. But what we're seeing is that the effects of this and the long time recovery for the people who were impacted by COVID are going to take years and years to come out of. When it hit, it was one of those things, and I can remember what was funny is we were the last county commission. We had the last meeting in Fairfax County, the Affordable Housing Council, before they shut us down. It was in March of 2020, and I remember all of us thinking, not sure how long we would be doing this. And what was great, and I think that is a real tribute to Fairfax County, is that as soon as we began to understand sort of what the health risks were going to be, the county pulled all of us together. So the nonprofits that serve on the front lines in the 4 regions of the county, faith communities, other volunteers, organizations that you volunteer with, and they pulled us together and we talked about how were we going to ensure the safety and care of our community in 5 areas. Certainly in housing and shelter. We're looking at transportation for those that could work or needed to get what was a safe way to travel. Food insecurity, which was going to be a major piece of it. Think about kids who were no longer in school, where they got the majority of their meals. Child care and out of school time programs. What was happening with kids who depended on being in those welcoming environments, and then looking at, of course, the healthcare access issues. So we all regrouped around that, and as a county, I think it was just tremendous to be able to plan for how to educate people, how to make sure that we were retooling our programs to reach them. For shelters and for organizations like ours, we worked with the county to stand up what were called CUPID shelters, quarantine, protection, isolation centers where people could decompress and be safe. These were hotels for people who didn't have housing, moving people out of the shelter because we had to depopulate our shelters in order to protect the residents there because we had to have the social distance. We set up more housing opportunities with rental assistance. The county received federal and state grants, and organizations like Cornerstones helped distribute more than $100 million in rent relief over the last 3 months.
Wow.
And if that number, $100 million in rent and some nutrition assistance, doesn't scare you and tell the story of how vulnerable and how many families are living on the edge, I don't know what it is. So it's still very close here. We're just coming out of it, but as we responded to try to keep people safe, bringing people back into shelter, seeing people back safely to work, into child care centers, getting kids back to school. What we know is that we learned a lot about resiliency and the amazing community that we work in. We learned a lot about the generosity of our community, the know-how we could make a difference. But we also learned a lot about isolation. And all of us felt that, I know, in some way. And if I don't have to be on another Zoom call, it won't happen too soon. But what's really sad, and I think what it does is open our eyes and our hearts to the isolation that people feel, people who are struggling with homelessness, people who don't have a lot of options. And I hope that's a good thing, that we can continue to, you know, carry in and make that part of our ongoing response to people who need our help.
Yeah, thank you for doing that important work.
Yes.
You're kind of in a unique position where you have to wear dual hats as the chair of AHAC and then as the CEO of Cornerstones. And I know how important information sharing is in an emergency, so it sounds like everyone really got together to try to figure out how to come together and just make the best of the situation as they could.
Right.
And it sounds like elected officials were responsive to getting you the resources, but that the capacity really increased exponentially overnight.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, just logistically, how you handled that and where you saw the cracks coming in. I know, running an organization that suddenly has so much need put on it overnight could not be easy.
And it wasn't. It was the same thing we saw in hospitals and the county itself, trying to hire people to fill these hotels to provide the care and 24/7 support for individuals who were staying in these quarantine hotels while still maintaining the shelters. And you know, there were so many people who might ordinarily choose to work for a nonprofit, choose to come in and work in the area of homelessness, but they were home caring for their kids. They didn't have options. Or we had a number of our staff who had to take leave to take care of a dependent family member or elderly parent, couldn't risk coming to work in a homeless shelter, maybe being exposed, immunocompromised, all of the issues that we all thought about, and then can I take that back home? So it was a real struggle on all of the serving professions, and law enforcement and healthcare and human services. How do you keep people staffed? And we had over 6,000 volunteers that worked with us before COVID hit, and we had to go down to nearly nothing. Now, volunteers, you're one of them.
Yes.
Organizations like Rest and Strong and other groups that, were amazing and also figured out how to help, but we couldn't have people in our programs, and so we had to really figure out how to work outside in parking lots, do drive-through food drives, take things to people who were in need. So it was a time of learning, flexibility, pivot. Those were the big words.
You mentioned the hoteling program, and I think you were mentioning the Cupid hotels, which were funded by FEMA.
Right.
And if I recall, they ended up closing even though there was still funding available due to the staffing issues. So even though there was still a need for it and there was funding, you just could not find people during the pandemic who were willing and able to staff those positions.
It was both a staffing issue as people were sort of returning to regular jobs. We had a lot of people that filled in part-time and then their regular job came back. But it was also, again, that reality that what we had been working through all through COVID was about trying to find people housing. Shelter is not the answer. What we need to do is build and preserve the housing to have a solution for people long-term. And so I think a lot of the focus shifted at that point to how do we get people back into housing? How can we now look at opportunities for people now that some of the housing was coming back online? But it was tough, and certainly we've seen it in Reston and around the county that there are still, just as there are every year, but there are people who are unhoused, who don't have the options, and who are still waiting for temporary shelter or other supports.
So it sounds like the long-term need is really going to be about housing,
right.
And there's still the short-term needs of transitional housing, shelter, staffing, services, and programs. And I'm curious to know what is something that you're excited about for the future? What does Cornerstones have to look forward to?
Yeah. I think one of the things that we're excited about and very proud of the people that supported us is that even while we were dealing with the emergent need, we kept our eye on that long term. And I'm proud to say that we have over 200 new homes in development, new housing for people who work living wage to minimum wage jobs, people that earn up to $80,000 a year, a family of 3 and still can't afford to live here. So we are building that housing, and included in that is permanent supportive housing. Permanent supportive housing is really the answer, the solution for people that have been disabled or have had chronic episodes of homelessness, and so it's a place of their own. So that's something to look forward to.
Absolutely. And if our audience is feeling inspired to get involved, how can they support your work?
Always on our website, so there's so many ways to volunteer. We publish information right now with the heat, the emergency heat. We need water. We need support for individuals who are trying to get out of the heat. But I'd also say, and knowing that you ran for public office, which makes me so proud that people are willing to stand and do that, and I thank you for that, it's really get involved, not just volunteering. Take a page out of the amazing Mary Paden, who puts us all to shame and runs all over the county. Get involved, say yes when someone asks for your help or to help us build more housing.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I definitely learned a lot from everyone who I got to meet when I ran for office, and Mary and you also inspire me to continue volunteering and doing that work, and I really think it's important for the next generation to start getting civically engaged, and you know, we're the future, so we need to be involved in our community as well.
Great, thank you.
And we have like 1 minute left, so I wanted to ask you a fun question.
Okay.
I want to know, what is the best piece of advice you have ever received? In 40 seconds.
To keep the long game in mind. Play the long game. If you really want to solve the issues that need solving, it's patience.
Having patience. That's really good advice, and thank you so much for being here. It was lovely to talk to you.
You too.
And that's all we have for tonight. Be sure to tune in next week and have a wonderful evening.